Hello and welcome to our fourth reflection video. My name is Ariel and my partners are Victor, Monica, and Pluma. In this reflection video, we will be discussing chapter 8 and specifically focusing on the section related to poverty.
Hello, my name is Victor, and I will be talking about section 8.3.3. This section talks about how climate changes exacerbates poverty by affecting the livelihoods of the most vulnerable populations. And in this section, it talks about how climate changes impact agriculture, fisheries, and other means of subsistence, and how people who are living in poverty are in even greater challenges to the to due to their status of already being in poverty, and with climate change being a forceful increase of that, it will make them suffer even more. And it also talks about how the need to adapt to new conditions often requires resources that impoverished communities lack of, making it harder for them to achieve equity and sustainability. Since poor communities are in great lack of resources, they will face even more challenges with needing more resources due to climate change. And in section 8.3.4, it talks about how economic and non-economic losses due to climate change disproportionately impact poor communities. And for example, when crops fail or properties are damaged, poor communities suffer more because they have fewer resources to recover. And this means because that since poor communities are like in great are are vulnerable of natural resources and hurricanes and natural disasters, they will become even more damaged due to economic losses that climate change will bring. And it also talks about how non-economic losses such as health issues and loss of cultural heritage also hit this community harder, deepening the cycle of poverty and inequality. And it's meaning that how non-economic classes, so the poor and the rich will not suffer from health issues, or will suffer from health issues, but not as much as poor communities because they don't have enough resources to recover from those health issues. And in section 8.3.5, it talks about how the economic and non-economic impacts of climate change force impoverished communities to change their livelihoods. And there were three main leads on this section. It talks about how further economic instability and how it increases poverty, and how there's a widened gap between the poor and the rich, and how without proper strategies to close that gap, it will become more and more bigger. And how it talks about also how addressing both climate resilience and its social equality and adaptation to efforts, because at the end of the day, they should make efforts for poor communities to have a chance to survive and to not suffer as much as they would if they didn't have help. And the source that I used was the climate crisis, how the climate crisis disproportionately hits the poor, and how can we protect them. And it had three main leads, and it talks about how it severely jeopardizes their health, and how existing burden of diseases and exacerbating existing barriers to accessing health services, and how an increase of global warming will lead to a greater risk of more diseases to be brought out, and making a lot of people at risk of health issues. And number two, hunger, and how higher consumption prices and changes in rural income become because of impacts on agricultural productivity due to climate change, will have gradual increases of prices through the long-term climate trends and more frequent and severe natural disasters, and how water scarcity, how droughts, increased evaporations, and changes in rainfall pattern due to climate change will impact many areas with water, and it has showcased how in 2025 there will be 5 billion people living on a planet, and over 1.7 billion will be suffering from water scarcity due to the climate crisis happening. And that is it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Monica, and today I'll be summarizing Climate Change 2002, It Impacts Adaptation and Vulnerability, specifically in Chapter 8 and the section 8.61, Synergies and Trade-off. In this section of Chapter 8, it delved into the findings of synergies between vegetation and adaptation methods across several sectors. Is the goal of the climate resilient development, or the CRD. There are trade-offs. Even though some industries have greater potential for synergy, the goal of climate resilient development is to find areas where different sectors and adaptations and vegetation methods can work together. And there are trade-offs even though some industries have greater potential for synergy. Some of the challenges and the consideration is the integrated approaches require strong institutional support and multi-level governments. The balancing of local and global priorities is crucial for successful implementation, and further research is needed to understand the trade-offs and the synergies at different scales. So kind of to conclude everything is while there are significant opportunities for synergies between adaptation and vegetation across sectors, careful planning and implementations are necessary to minimize trade-offs and ensure equitable outcome for vulnerable communities. And some of the questions you could have for this is, how can we address the challenges of adopting climate smart practices in developing countries, particularly for small scale farmers with limited resources? Or how can policy frameworks be designed to be better support and incentivize an integrated climate action across different sectors? And then here in the image, you could see the synergy. I believe it was the clean water. So it's kind of, you see how these poor communities may have more difficulty. So that's going back to the question of the small scale farmers. How can we help these communities, and with what resources we're going to need throughout right now and in the future? My next source is How Can We Mitigate Climate Crisis by Leveraging AI by Inshambi Shetty. It was a TED Talk video, and Shetty emphasizes the urgency of addressing the climate crisis through a systemic change and the transformative potential of AI sustainability. Some of the key insights she kind of talks about is moral imperative. Shetty highlights that the climate crisis transcends politics and presenting this as a moral and spiritual challenge for all. This is a perspective of crucial for mobilizing collective action. She also talks about systemic solutions. While individuals' actions are important, they are insufficient without addressing the systemic roots of climate change found in high emission industries like cement and steel, as well as the industry impact. Many high emission sectors are often overlooked, but they play a significant role in the climate crisis, and awareness of these industries can guide targeted solutions. And then it talks about the innovative approach, a method which, such as a regenerative agriculture, can sequester carbon and restore ecosystems, showcasing that sustainability can also mean healing the planet. And then kind of talking more about the AI potential, the application of AI in climate science, such as weather prediction and emissions tracking, underscores its potential to create impactful solutions and improve accuracy in climate modeling. And then lastly, she kind of talks about the empowering the youth. The youth hold the power to drive climate action, and their development is essentially for reshaping the narrative around the climate change. And then kind of she lastly kind of talked about the interdisciplinary roles. Every discipline, whether it's in STEM or arts, can contribute to the climate solutions, engaging in a diverse perspective can inspire innovative approaches to sustainability. And here you can see an image. I use Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, to kind of like show me a picture of how AI can be used to kind of help with smog. And this is the picture it gave me. So this is kind of showing how AI could be used to fight climate change, but not only climate change, but maybe poverty. A lot of the issues we have right now can be solved, or AI can be used to kind of like help us guide how to solve these problems. And it's pretty interesting to see how technology will advance to kind of mitigate these issues.
Chapter 8, Section 8.2.1 focuses on how climate change affects poverty, livelihoods, and sustainable development, especially in low-income communities. It highlights how climate events combined with other factors like poor governance and economic instability make it harder for vulnerable populations to recover from disasters, trapping them in these cycles of poverty. Some key takeaways: one, climate hazards like droughts and extreme weather hit low-income populations the hardest, particularly in rural areas dependent on agriculture. These events push people into deeper poverty, especially when they occur repeatedly before recovery is possible. Two, vulnerable populations often face several climate risks at once, such as landslides triggered by glacier melt and heavy rains. These events are harder to recover from and further deepen poverty levels. Three, issues like poor governance, unclear property rights, and urban planning failures amplify the effects of climate change, making it even more challenging for the poor to recover from disasters and improve their livelihoods. Four, climate change indirectly raises costs for food and housing, healthcare, which disproportionately affects the poor and makes it harder for them to meet basic needs. And questions related to the text: how can newer data sources like satellite imagery and indigenous knowledge be better used in climate adaptation plans to benefit the most vulnerable populations? A summary of the IPCC report focuses on how climate change is disproportionately affecting vulnerable populations, particularly those who are poor and marginalized. The report emphasizes the increasing intensity of climate hazards like extreme weather, which exacerbates inequality and poverty. It stresses the importance of targeted strategies such as adaptation and mitigation to protect communities most at risk. Some key takeaways from the NOAA. One, climate change disproportionately impacts low-income and marginalized communities who are more vulnerable to extreme weather like floods and droughts. These communities are often less prepared and face greater challenges recovering from these disasters. Two, the report highlights the danger of interconnected climate risks where one disaster can trigger another. This makes it even harder for the poor communities to recover, trapping them in the cycle of poverty. Three, climate change indirectly raises the cost of living, particularly in food, housing, and healthcare. These rising expenses make it even harder for the poor to maintain their livelihoods. Four, adaptation strategies are crucial to help vulnerable communities. Local and global cooperation is needed to implement sustainable infrastructure and governance that mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. Some questions related to the text: how can governments, particularly in developing regions, improve adaptation measures to better protect vulnerable populations from climate change?
So to conclude our video, climate change worsens poverty by destabilizing the livelihoods of vulnerable populations, especially in low-income communities. It declines in agriculture and fisheries, along with the economic losses from disasters. It affects the poor, deepening inequalities. Monica Mazzano's work in the Climate Change 2022 report highlight the need for climate-resilient development to identify synergies in adaptation and mitigation strategies. However, challenges like resource limitations and governance issues impede recovery. Without effective strategies that promote resilience and social equity, the gap between rich and poor will continue to widen, threatening health, food security, and water access for millions. Addressing these challenges is vital for protecting at-risk communities.